It's
There we go.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, good. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November meeting of the Oregon City Library Board. And those in attendance are Cynthia Andrews, Heidi Blackwell, Nick Dierkman, Carrie Linder, Larry Osborne, Elizabeth Zinter, myself, David Goldberg, and Greg Williams, the library director, and Denise Butcher, the operations manager. I want to thank Denise for, thank Cynthia for chairing the last meeting. I had a family medical surprise, and which resolved fine, thank you. So
Awesome.
there we go. So ask for approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Anybody have any corrections or thoughts?
I just know they're extensive. Don't put it that way.
It looked like a long meeting.
They're very, very detailed, and no one can. It's hard to argue with them. With those minutes.
Yes, really.
But
There was so much.
We also have you on tape, so
Yes.
That's right. That's true too. Good point. So,
There was so much information. It's hard to know whether you forgot something or not. So.
I mean,
Well, I would move to accept the minutes as presented.
okay, motion heard. Any second, please?
Second.
Okay, second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Good. So now for the library director's report for November, please.
All right, thank you, David. And just let the group, we can always do a level lower of detail on the minutes.
Yes.
If that would be useful. It's always a challenge to strike the balance between faithfully recording what happened in the minutes and not overwhelming people. So feedback taken. So we'll
Well,
see.
I don't think
I didn't mean that in a negative sense, but
okay.
But I mean I know they're extensive. I mean it's that's something we may want to discuss at some point in time.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll put it in the parking lot.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that they were too detailed either. I think they're very helpful if you're representing what happened at a meeting to the public and trying to remember some of the details that were discussed. I think they're helpful to be very accurate.
Okay,
It was
great.
helpful for me certainly to know exactly what happened in the meeting. So that was very
Yes.
good. So,
Okay.
But,
All right.
all
right.
but we do also have the video, which
yes, that's right.
is real life. But
True.
so anyhow, I
All
think
right.
we just should have a discussion at some point.
Okay.
All right, Greg.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. I will not go through everything in the director's report. I'll just hit some highlights as usual. And if you have questions about anything that's in there or anything that's not in there, please let me know and I will do my best to answer them. So statistics wise, I just wanted to point out, every October, our county office does a purge of inactive library card accounts. In general, an inactive person is somebody who hasn't had any activity on their card in more than 3 years and doesn't have any outstanding lost item fees or anything like that. So once a year, you kind of see this dip in the current count of library card users. And so that's what you're seeing this month. That's the reason for that dip. And the reason we do it once a year is they used to do it on a rolling basis, but the advice from the county records retention folks was to do it on an annual basis and do a little better job of documenting exactly which records were being deleted and why. So that's why they do it that way.
One point real quick. I noticed that the last year it went down to about 18,000 and some, and this year it went down to 16,000 and some. And I'm wondering if that's reflects some of the with COVID over the last year and a half, or that I wonder what the impact of that was on people using the library, and maybe that's why it dropped as much as it did.
I think that's probably a pretty good theory. I haven't delved into it, but Denise and I were just talking this afternoon that every library that we've seen talk about this, I think some of us expected the minute that the doors opened, everybody would be back, just as much as they had in the past. And that has not turned out to be the case. So every library in the world is saying, people are coming out more slowly than we thought. So yes, I think there's probably part of that effect as well.
It should be interesting to see if we see more people joining back up.
Yeah, Yeah.
Than normal.
I kind of think we will, and because we're also going to have some really cool new things, and we'll get people in the door. So,
Well, and I think last year we made barely any cards compared to our normal. So
yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting. I'm really keen to see. We started, one of the silver linings of the pandemic when it comes to library cards is it really accelerated our e-card usage, allowing people to sign up online. And so that didn't start until the pandemic. And so I'm really keen to see how that impacts our numbers going forward. And the county is working on some new options to make that process a little more seamless, a little less friction. So that's kind of exciting. So. Okay, other statistics notes, just pointing out the third month in a row that we're a net lender within Link. So we're right at that 50-50 mark, which makes me very happy.
That's good. Yeah.
Operations. So I had to give all the photos of everybody in costume. So we all had a great time dressing up, and we've got a really creative staff at the library. So I have to say my favorite is probably Wayne and Garth. Aaron and Sabrina dressing up as Wayne and Garth. That's just perfect. They pull that off really well. But that was really fun. Sticking with Halloween, October, we focused a lot on Halloween, doing our Halloween programming. Our Haunted History event with Rocky Smith was very successful. We had 65 people attend live, and we got Rocky's permission to post that for another 2 weeks after the event so people could watch it on their own. And the number of views that racked up, it was close to 400 views afterwards. So that's great. We're very pleased to see that. If anybody saw Rocky's talk, I find them fascinating. He does a really good job. He has a depth of history to pull from when giving this content. He makes it really interesting. So we were glad to have that. Our Halloween scavenger hunt was successful. We had 269 people sign up through our Beanstack app. Of those, about 135 completed the scavenger hunt and came in for a prize. The prizes, we had cute little jack-o'-lantern buttons, and then we had a couple of grand prizes that we drew for participants. So that was lots of fun.
As an aside, I saw Brecken and I were at the library, and a mom and her daughter came in, and they were working on the Halloween scavenger hunt, and I think they were missing one, and it was pouring rain. And the children's librarian, I don't know where her name was, but she was so gracious and sweet, and the little girl was so excited to get her button. So I was kind of watching, Brecken was looking at it was really a sweet interaction, and she really was excited with the family about it. So it was really cool to see.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for sharing. That's I'm very glad to hear that our library staff did not send her out and say, no, you must go complete every challenge. So as a side note, my favorite interaction during Halloween was I had a young patron as well. So I came down in my X-Wing pilot costume, and we had a very serious discussion. He must have been about 3, right, Denise?
Yeah.
A very serious discussion. He was very disappointed that I left my lightsaber in my office, and really cautioned me against walking around as an X-Wing pilot without my lightsaber. So lesson learned. I will make sure to be fully dressed next Halloween. For other Halloween programming, we did our book displays, which were great. We had special trivia events for our BAM group, which was great. All of our adult trivia for the month was Halloween focused, and whoever that fishbowl player is who dominated the Halloween music trivia event, hats off to him. So I just had to crow a little bit. And probably the greatest thing we saw, the thing that made us the happiest for Halloween was, hopefully everybody saw the Oregon City News. We knew we were going to get an online story about it. We didn't know we were going to be on the front page of the paper above the fold. So we were very, very pleased to see that. That was really gratifying. I say, anytime you're on the front page of the paper and it's positive, it's great. So we were really happy about that. I do have to give kudos to Gina Bacon, our adult services librarian, and our graphic design whiz. She came up with that haunted library, that haunted Carnegie graphic, and we've gotten lots of great feedback about that. just fun. So we're really pleased to see that on the front page of the paper. So in other non-Halloween news, we are hosting the winners from the Parks Department 2021 Preserve Our Past Art and Poetry Contest. So those are on display in the Carnegie for people to come see. We have been really tickled with our teen question of the week whiteboard that we've put in the teen area. We've gotten some great questions. Sabrina is putting up a variety of questions for teens to answer. We try to mix it up between current events and more philosophical ones. And I shared some of the questions that we had asked and some of the responses that we had gotten over the course of October. My favorite being the Rorschach ink blot and seeing what teens thought of that. And our favorite interpretation was the giant flying jack-o'-lantern. So we firmly agree that that's probably from now on the proper interpretation of that ink blot. Let's see, the other things I wanted to mention. Starting in October, we have augmented our Lego Lab from Home program. So we had been having Blair Archer, who has done in the past, he's done our live programs. And when we get back to doing live programming, I'm sure we'll have him back again. He has a new option that he will put together customized Lego kits with some special pieces. And he incorporates those into his video lesson. And so we have worked with him. So I think we had 30 kits this month. Free Legos to kids, they go like that.
Yeah.
You know, so they've been very popular, but that's just another fun thing to be able to do. It's a nice augment to our craft kit program, which continues to be really, really popular. So we're excited to introduce that. I had the opportunity to, oh yeah.
Oh, I had a question on the Lego Lab pieces. I know those go super quick, and I know I've had, friends say, oh, we didn't get one. Is there an opportunity in the future for increasing funding so that could be made available to more people? Because I think 30 kits isn't much for our population, and I would imagine that would be something really cool for kids that don't get that opportunity to get, toys like that free often.
That is a great suggestion. We can definitely, within the budget we have, we can always reallocate money and take a look at that. We also have had discussions about, are there any other ways to do that sign up process that spreads it around a little more, so it's not always the same people who get up at 7 a.m. So we thought about maybe we open up 10 slots on one day and 10 slots at another day at another time, and kind of distribute it. But we will definitely look into that.
What's the cost per kit? Do you have any idea?
I'll ask Denise if you know off the top of your head.
It's a couple dollars.
Yeah, I don't think it's much.
It's not much.
Yeah. So yeah, we can definitely look at that. Let's see. I had the opportunity to meet with our teen advisory group for the first time in October, which was fantastic. They're a really great bunch of teens. They had some good questions. We had a really fun icebreaker, which we all discussed. If you had a time machine and you could take a 24-hour trip anywhere or anywhen you wanted, where would you go? The one that made me feel the oldest is one of our teens responded they would go back to the 90s because so much great music came out then. And my goodness, I felt really old. So we also talked a little bit about our goal to have the teen advisory group interact and work with the library board a little more, and they were all very excited and interested in that, very supportive of that. So
how many members are there in that advisory group?
I want to say 7. Denise, do you remember? Off the top of your
That's
head?
the number I remembered. So.
Yeah, I believe it's 7 because we had a couple that weren't able to make it, and I believe Sabrina said 7. So
okay, thank you. That's good.
And let's see, next month, I just wanted to highlight a program that we are putting on next month. And I want to thank Heidi for helping us make this connection with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They have put together a resource program and a resource kit for young kids to deal with mental wellness and mental health issues, which is a need that we have greatly in the community, especially during the past 20 months. So we have partnered with them. Through them, we got connected with Joan Hoff, who is a retired youth counselor who used to work for 30 years at the Dougie Center, which does grief counseling for kids and teens. And so she is going to facilitate a workshop that goes through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's book they put together for kids. It's called Gizmo's Possum Guide to Mental Health. So it's just, focused, giving kids some tools and to deal with feelings, to be able to talk about them, and to hopefully process and work through some of these issues in a little more constructive way. It's also geared towards families. It gives families a checklist, to try to work with their kids. We're going to do a live program and also a recorded one, just in case people aren't comfortable, being in a live group event. And we're going to have the Gizmos guide. We're going to add it to the collection, so it's always available in the kids area. So we're excited about that. Most of you probably know this has resonance for me because I lost my father to suicide last year. And so I'm glad that we're able to do this for the community. And thank you, Heidi, for helping us make that connection. It's really great.
Well done.
And then I just wanted to share, I just wanted to recognize Jen Giovanetti, one of our adult services staff members. She helped a patron with an interlibrary loan request, and we got a lovely little note from that patron. They said, Jen's an extraordinary reference librarian, and we could not agree more. So I just wanted to give Jen kudos and recognize her going above and beyond with a patron. And with that, that's all that I wanted to address. But if anybody's got questions about anything in the report or anything else, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
I do have a question for Greg and Liz, I guess. What would be the optimal number of Lego kits that you would need?
I have no idea. I was just hoping for a more, well, one question that it brought up was around equity too. If everybody has to be up at 7 a.m. and know that they need to be up at that time to get this kit for their child, that kind of got my gears turning around. Yeah. How equitable is that for various populations? But I don't know how many kids. I mean, yeah, I would love 300. See if they all go.
Yeah, I can tell you, I can ask Barrett to do a little data mining. I can tell you almost every kit that we've ever offered. I think we started kits. We probably started with kids for 30, and now I think in some of them we're up to 75 or 100. They go out like that. So I don't think we're anywhere near to meeting the full demand. I think Liz is right. We could do 300, and they'd go. Yeah, they'd go. So. But we can definitely, I think, we try to increase them. The nice thing about the Lego kits is somebody else is putting them together. So some of the kits that we do in-house, yes, it would be great to be able to put 200 kits out there, but that means that our staff members have to go and put 200 kits together and put the instructions in. For some of the kids ones we've done recently, we have gotten some kits from the University of Oregon that are focused around science and technology. Those come pre-assembled. Those have been great. So we're always looking for more opportunities for kits that we can get that, kind of meet our quality, goals and give kids something interesting and fun to do. But if they're already put together, that's even better. So
I was just wondering, what the budget implications really were if we met the demand.
For our next meeting, I'm happy to crunch some numbers and try to take some guesses at what those might be. I think we can. Yes, I think we could easily get in the hundreds. Yeah. For these. And then I guess and with the Lego ones, I would also want to check with Blair what his capacity is as well, because I believe he's a smaller operator. He doesn't have a staff of hundreds to help him put these kits together. So we'd have to work with him to make sure that he's able to help meet demand as well. So,
any other questions?
I do. Well, I had an idea about the kits. Just you can try to wait till the people register for the class and then do some kind of a raffle of names. I mean, that's, as a teacher, we would do that in class when there was one pen that everybody liked or something. That was That's an idea. Then I also want to mention that
That's one.
Gizmo mental health, there is a Spanish version too.
Oh,
that
thank you
will
for
be
mentioning that, Heidi. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you.
So that's another resource. The question I had was about the statistical report. When I was looking at it, there was the library visitors in and library visitors out. So one, the numbers didn't match, which I thought was interesting. And then
Yes.
two, I was just kind of curious on the year to date. There was a number of 35,000. Is that what's the year to date? What are the that goes from what month to what month? Or
So to answer your second question, first fiscal year to date, so starting July 1st. So that's
Okay.
July, August, September, October. So
Okay.
on that report, any year-to-date information is fiscal year based. Yes, I've never seen a people counter system where the ins and outs match exactly. It's just the nature of the beast. The vendors say, they guarantee 97, 98% accuracy. One of the things that probably impacts our ins right now, which is why I put both numbers there, is that we have staff members who will go out a door in the community room that isn't monitored to go out and empty the book drops. And when they come back in with the book drops, sometimes they come in through that 6th Street entrance. So we are actually in the process of getting staff name tags that have a special barcode on them that will have the people counters not count our staff as they go in and out. So I anticipate that once we get those name tags and get that all configured, those ins and out numbers will get a little closer because it won't be counting the staff, going in and out. But
yeah, more I was looking at because of the 35,000, and then I was comparing it to the service area, which is later in the report when I had 60,000. So I was just kind of seeing how those number compare, and because obviously we want to make sure we're getting as close to that 60,000 as we can to serve everyone in some capacity. So, but
yeah, and I think at the end of the year our counts are going to be much more than the service area, because those counts aren't counting individuals. Somebody coming in 5 times in the course of a week, they're going to be counted 5 times. So
yeah,
you're going to get more people in there. I'll point out one statistic we do look at to try to kind of gauge how well, at least when it comes to circulation, how well we're meeting the needs of our unincorporated and our city residents, is we have that breakdown between population. And then I also break down that one of those circulation numbers, I break it down by residents in the city and residents out of the city. And what we like to see is that those circulation numbers, those percentages generally match, that of our service area. So for example, for this month, let me scroll down in there and I'll point you the exact one that I'm talking about. All right. So that circulation demographics section. So it says borrowers, city residents, borrowers, unincorporated residents, and borrowers other. So we take a look at our circulation for the month, and we have a report which categorizes those borrowers. Do they live in the city? Do they live in the unincorporated area? In this case, we have an other, which sometimes that can just be it's classified incorrectly in the system, or it could truly be that they're from out of, we have a reciprocal agreement with other counties that people from other counties can come get cards. But you can see there, are of the people who have circulated materials during the month, about 58% were city residents. And then right below that, if you look at the service area population, we break that down, and our service area population is right about 58% of city residents. So that's one metric to us that shows us, okay, we're providing a service. Yes, we know that we're in the upper northwest corner of our service area, but at least we are getting circulation that is distributed close to what our service area population is.
Thank you for that breakdown. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
I think we all heard the assurance that the skeletal remains of patrons who got locked in will not be found in the future, right? Good. Are there any public comments?
No.
No public comments, okay. Discussion items, the LDAC annual progress report.
All right, so LDAC annual progress report. So some of you will be familiar with this. I know for some of the newer folks, might not be as familiar. So forgive me if I tell you stuff you already knew. So the Oregon City Library is part of the Clackamas County Library District. And so we're one of 13 locations, 11 cities within the district that all participate within the district. So we all get funding from the library district. And when the library district was formed, part of the agreement was that there was going to be a library district advisory committee that would, meet periodically. They would be the ones who report to the county commissioners and basically make sure that the libraries who were receiving district funds were meeting the goals of the district and the goals that are outlined in the intergovernmental agreement. And so that Library District Advisory Committee is made up of citizen representatives, library board members from each linked library. So Nick is our LDAC rep. He's Oregon City's representative to Library District Advisory Committee. And the tool that was developed when the district first formed in order to report on what libraries were doing to meet the goals of the district was called this annual progress report. And the annual progress report has been through a couple of iterations since 2008. This is the most recent one. It's gotten a lot longer, a lot more detailed, which is great. It really helps for some more apples to apples comparisons between individual libraries in the district. And what we do is every year, every library fills out the annual progress report. We bring it to the library board to discuss, to answer any questions. There are some questions on here where the library board is, we encourage the library board to provide any feedback that they may want LDAC to know about. And then we submit it to LDAC, and LDAC consolidates these, takes a look at them, and we have discussions at the LDAC meetings about some of this data. Nick and I are going to talk about that a little later in the meeting. And then it's a tool for the LDAC representatives to kind of see what other libraries are doing and to ask any questions they may have. So that's kind of the genesis of this form. In your packet, I did provide the standards that are incorporated into the Library District Intergovernmental Agreement. It's that last page of your packet. It's entitled Attachment C. And you'll see that a little later in the report, we ask, are you meeting these threshold standards? So if you're curious as to what standards are being referred to, it's those that are in Attachment C. I will tell you that those standards are no longer current. The Oregon Library Association does not use those standards anymore, but the IGA has never been updated, to use any other standards besides that. So that's why the report refers to these standards. And when we say annual progress, the original intention was, okay, here's what these district funds are supposed to allow libraries to do. How have you tried to meet these aspirational standards? So in the intervening years, we've expanded the annual progress report. So I'm going to go through it section by section. And if you've got any questions or anything you want to add, as we prepare this, please feel free to jump in. So section 1 is library board composition. So one of the key as we've just discussed, we want to make sure that every library, most libraries are responsible for serving both their city residents and a portion of the unincorporated population. And part of the goal of the district was to make sure that local library boards matched that composition of their service area. So section 1 of the annual progress report is we take a look at the population of our service area, how many percentage live in the city, how many are unincorporated residents. And then we compare that with the composition of our library board. And the goal would be that you have, pretty closely matching percentages. If you've got 60% of your population lives in the city, 60% of your library board or thereabouts, the goal is that your library board kind of reflects that demographic population. So you can see for our library board, our municipal code, I would say our municipal code gives us a structure that does allow us to meet those percentages that would match our service area. Right now, with the applications that we had, with the people who applied, we didn't get anybody who was specifically from the unincorporated area. So when you do the count by city and unincorporated, it looks a little skewed. For our library board member, we do have an at-large category, and Nick is our at-large member, and that person can come from either the city or an unincorporated area. And I will say I'm going to give Nick some kudos here. As an at-large member, Nick is extraordinarily well-versed and experienced in the library district and understands the goal and the need to make sure unincorporated residents' interests are looked after. He's on the library district budget committee. He's been going to LDAC for years. So when I look at that breakdown, 5 and 2, yes, Nick lives in the city, but he's our at-large member, and knowing that he is so well-versed in these unincorporated residents, it doesn't cause me any deep angst about our representation and that our library board is looking after the interests of our entire service area. But if there are any questions about that or any comments anybody has, happy to hear them. No. Okay, does section 1 make sense? Does that all make sense what they're looking for? Okay. All right, so section 2, which is kind of the next 5 pages, that's the financial data. And so the LDAC kind of went through a process of trying to figure out, okay, what financial information would be useful, for us to know. As with any financial data, you can drill down real granular, or you can get very high level. I think the first iteration of this form, it was a little too high level for some of our LDAC reps. And so we worked to kind of find a good balance that gave kind of a more granular breakdown of the broad uses of district funds and the broad expense categories that we had, but tried to do it in such a way that it wasn't overwhelming. So you'll see that the revenues here, the first section details revenues. It shows how much we receive from the library district. It shows how much we receive from our city, so from the city of Oregon City, how much we get from ready to read grants and any other revenue sources that we have. And so those have all been outlined here. We give some fund balance information. We say, here's what the library fund balance and our community facilities fund balance was at the beginning of the fiscal year. Here's what they were at the end of the fiscal year. And you'll notice in here, I have a little discussion about, our library fund balance is about $3.5 million. And so I've put some information in there about why that fund balance is where it is. And I think when we get a little farther along, we'll talk a little bit more about fund balance, because that is an issue that has come up recently at LDAC meetings. And so I want to make sure the library board is conversant with that conversation and has a chance to ask any questions that you might have. So that's the revenue section. Expenditures follows kind of the same thing, as we just take broad categories of expenditures that we're making, and we report those for the fiscal year. So salary, wages, benefits, collection expenditures, and we just break the other categories are just broken down to, again, trying not to get so granular that it's natural gas costs. We'll roll that up into utilities. We'll put utilities and things like that together. So if you have any questions about any of those numbers, I'm happy to answer them. And then one issue that LDAC has historically been very interested in and continues to be interested in is allocated costs. So for those of you who might not have seen a city budget before, we get the benefit of having an HR department who provides us with human resources services. We have a finance department who prepares our budget for us and helps us pay our bills. We have an IT department who provides IT support and makes sure our computers work. Those services don't come for free. Somebody has to pay for those. And so typically in a city, every department will pay what's called a cost allocation. And they're typically based on the number of full-time employees you have. So for example, in our city for this fiscal year that's being reported here, they took a look at, okay, how much does the HR service cost throughout the city? How many FTE did the library have as compared with the rest of the city? Get that ratio, and their allocated cost for human resources was $37,500. So we pay $37,500 out of our library district distribution. It gets transferred over to the city so that we can pay our fair share of that human resources cost. Same thing for information technology. We have a GIS cost there. I will say for those of you who have been on the board, for a while or have been looking at this, our allocated costs do go up. They have gone up in from previous years. You will see when we do next year's annual progress report, our allocations have gone up further. We have some more allocations that are being allocated to the library. That is always a topic that LDAC discusses, and I think I'm going to let Nick talk about that first because he's our LDAC representative, and I want to defer to him. I will say that the concept of allocations is not untoward. These are services. If I had to go out and procure human resources services on my own, it would cost me a lot more than $37,500. If I had to do my budget all by myself, I couldn't do it. So it's great to have a finance department and pay them a little bit to help with all of that. So
it's also offset by the contribution the city makes to the library.
Yes, that is correct. So and I don't know, Nick, do you want to talk about LDACs theory of allocated costs and general fund contributions?
Well, it really goes back to the ballot measure. Well, I think it was 2008. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in 2008, there was a ballot measure to establish the library district, and in that ballot measure, it kind of defined what the intent was for the funds that were being provided to support the library district. So there's interpretations. There is the master agreement and the intergovernmental agreement with the individual libraries that establish some definition around this, but at that point in time, there are, I'll say, some members. There are members of the Library District Advisory Committee that have been around since 2008, and they have their interpretation of what the ballot measure meant, and their focus is on operations. So when they say operations, they are saying direct operations of the library. So when you get into things like these cost allocations, they would debate that that's not a direct cost to the that the library district funds should not be used for those other services that are being provided by the libraries. I'm sorry, by the cities to support the libraries. And as Greg was pointing out, when you look at a comparison across all the libraries for cost allocations, it's radically, it's all over the place. So I think when I reviewed the report that across all the libraries, I think we're pretty conservative in terms of how much we're really being allocated compared to some of the other libraries. I think there are others that are similar to us in terms of how the allocations are being identified. But then there are some that again are pretty you probably things that could be challenged if you wanted to challenge them. And we do have we have, like as I mentioned, we do have library district advisory committee members that have been around for a long time, and they were involved in getting the ballot measure passed, and that they are very vocal in terms of how they share their view of how this fund should be spent. Is that
Thank
fair?
you.
Is that
yeah?
is that fair?
No, that's great, and I just want to make sure everybody understands how allocations, how they work, what they're used for. As part of this report, there is a question that says, does the library board have any concerns about the city's cost allocation? So I want to make sure that that I don't have any concerns. But this is a report that the library board is, it's a vehicle for you to express to the Library District Advisory Committee if you do have any concerns or questions. And so if there are any, I would want to make sure that I capture those in this report before it's submitted. So,
Well,
I look at it.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nick.
No, what I was going to say is when I look at it in terms of the services that are being provided on behalf of the library, those are all logical areas that we would, if the library was an independent organization, that they would have to do those services somehow, finance and, the HR and all those things that are associated with that. So I like I said, as I mentioned earlier, not even in this perspective, but I think our allocations are reasonable and somewhat conservative compared to some of the other libraries.
The one concern that I want to articulate is one that came up during the budget hearing, and when we were sitting with the mayor and a few of the city councilors, the city commissioners, and my concern is that the net of what the city is contributing to the library has been going down, and I think that we need to recognize that that's been happening, and that's not a trend that we want to see continue. And whether it's it's the net of their contribution minus the allocations, I agree with you, Nick. I think the allocations are totally reasonable. In fact, are probably very low compared to what the market what it would cost to replace those services. But the real issue for me with the city is the top line. And I think that, maybe that's, I don't know if this is the appropriate place to put that concern by the board, but if it is, I would suggest we do so.
I would say it would be, if that was a concern, yes, if that was a concern, this would be a good place to put it. I will echo David. Yes, looking at the when we do the budget, we are always looking very closely at how much the city is contributing in general fund dollars, and David is correct. That general fund contribution has been going down over the past few years, and allocations have been going up over the past few years. So it is something to look at budgetarily. I'm trying not to steer the group one way or the other, because this is your report. So this is I want you to feel free to put your feedback and your thoughts in this.
Well, going to part of David's question, is this the appropriate forum or venue? Some kind of comment in this report, or is it better to address it from another perspective? I don't know enough about it to understand that piece.
That is indeed my thought. Is this? I mean, does this create any political problems for you, Greg? If in fact in a public document the advisory board is saying that the city needs to step up?
No, I mean that's feedback that you can definitely give. I would say so for the LDAC, for this report, I would say the most appropriate use of this would be if the library board felt that allocations were being charged to the library that were unreasonable, that were not consistent with operating a public library. An example from a few years ago is there was a city who was charging their library allocated costs for their aquatic center. And the discussion came up at LDAC, said, well, wait a minute, how is an allocation for an aquatic center directly related to the operation of a public library? And as a result of that discussion, the city did change their practice. So if there was a concern about, I would say, the nature of the allocations being charged, the reasonableness of the allocations being charged, that would be a really good thing to put into this report that goes to LDAC. For the concern about the balance between general fund contribution and allocations and other sources of revenue, my gut feeling is that would be a better conversation to have as part of the budget process, and to be collective library board feedback that that you would help me put together the budget proposal for the library and put that feedback into that budget proposal, and go testify to the budget committee if that's what everybody felt like doing. So
good.
I would think that's a good suggestion, because that gives us a little more time as a board to look at the history of it. We understand the fact of it, but how does what's kind of the history and what percentages are we talking about and what are we looking at into the future? It seems like a little bit more of a long range issue than the LDAC report could really address.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think the way that Greg explained it makes sense in terms of when we would really look at what the what the general fund dollars are that are being allocated to the library. I mean, I think that leads to a lot of debate. There could be the debate around that topic because of sort of where we are from a need standpoint, also in terms of the those dollars. But I can tell you, as the LDAC representative for our board here, that being able to say that we are getting dollars from general fund to support the library, and it's even better when it is greater than the amount that we're doing for allocations. That makes it very easy to talk about it and on behalf of Oregon City Library at the LDAC meeting.
Right. And that is certainly the case. Yeah.
Yes, that is the case for 1920. That is the case for this current biennium that we're in.
Right.
Where it goes in the future, we'll see. My crystal ball works just as well as everybody else's, which is not at all. So, okay.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to point out on the expenditure side of this, because this is also a topic that comes up at LDAC, and it came up at our last meeting, is the fact that we pay debt service out of our a portion of the debt service that we pay is being paid by district dollars. And I will say historically, there have been differing interpretations of what the ballot measure, the master order, and the IGA say about whether or not district dollars can be used for capital expenses and debt service. One of the goals of the task force that was put together right before COVID hit was to try to get everybody together to hash out some of these differing interpretations and come to a consensus about that. And that process has been put on hold during COVID. I know the county commissioners, Commissioner Savas comes to our LDAC meetings, and he has said vocally at the last couple of meetings that the county does fully intend to continue with the task force when conditions permit, because there are some of these questions out there that it would be good for you to have a little more clarity around. So, so on this report, you can see that yes, every year we do pay debt service. We do get some money from the general fund, but a good portion of that debt service is coming from our library district distributions. And like I said, there are some cities who have made different choices on how to fund their capital needs. Some have elected to use district distributions, like we have. There are others who have elected not to use them because they feel that they went a different direction. So.
One thing to add to that, Greg, unless you were going to talk about it, is the fact that when the bond was acquired, we went out to a vote of the people.
Yes.
It was the one aspect of it was the vote of the Oregon City residents, but it was approved that we would use the funds coming from the library district to fund or to pay off those bonds. So, I mean, it wasn't done without, I mean, the fact that that's how it's being used was very transparent, and actually, like I said, went to a vote of the people of Oregon City,
Right.
not the entire district. So I want to make sure that that's clear, but it was Oregon City, and that ballot measure passed. So that gives us, I mean, I feel like that's pretty significant justification for the use of those funds. And I was trying to think of the other aspect of it is it's somewhat interpretation about what that means. And again, there are the individuals that that were involved when the ballot measure went through. They have the history, so I'm not discrediting what they're saying, and I don't know if I totally support their interpretation, but they do have the history, and again, their interpretation is that's not an operational expense. That the facility, the physical facility, or the capital that it takes to build a library is not an operating expense. And again, that's definitely debatable. I mean, usually from an accounting standpoint, you have capital funds, and you have operating funds, and those are separate areas. So I think, again, that's something to consider. The other aspect of it is as an example, when we were in the Hilltop Library as a rental situation, we were paying for our rent as part of operating expense, and that's not debated. That's not debated as that those are costs that we shouldn't be paying through library district funds. So I just find it, where do you draw the line in a sense? Because we're using this funding source in a similar way to what it would be if we were renting the library,
Right.
As we did in the past.
It sounds like the likelihood of any recourse here is very tiny. I mean, we've got a public bond measure that is, that is now in law, basically, is put into place, that the repayment will come through this. So I don't have very many concerns. I mean, it sounds like there's some people that might have some different opinions, but do you think, Nick, there's any likelihood that there'd be any consequences to this?
Well, it depends on who you ask on the library district.
Really?
I think, and also then, we're on the advisory committee to the Board of Commissioners, who are the actual, they're the library district commissioners. So I think we would have, we would have a good justification for what we did. And also, I think there's there are 2 new libraries that are being built by the county for Oak Lodge and Gladstone. And I think there may be some, even how those dollars are being acquired and spent and all those kind of things, there could be debate about that also.
Yes, you're okay. And if I may, just to tag on to that, I would say, and the directors, we sent a letter to LDAC a couple of years ago, which kind of started the whole task force process. Is we see there's a problem on how to finance libraries in Clackamas County. Existing revenue sources are not sufficient to fund both operations and long-term capital expenses. The district distribution in and of itself is not sufficient to pay for all those costs. So there has to be a conversation of, what do communities need from their libraries? What kind of capital expenses are involved in that? And how do you pay for it? And that was another thing that the task force was intended to try to, get some clarity around and have some discussions around. So from my personal perspective, looking at what libraries have done in the past, to try to provide service and to try to be as responsive as they can under the circumstances that they find themselves in, that's not as useful as a conversation about, okay, if you're not happy with the way things have been done, how do we fix this going forward? What are the solutions? How do we address these problems that people have? And the task force will do that at some point.
When the task force was set up, it was, that part of the thought was that we would probably have to go out for a new bond measure, or, to increase. I think it's 39.5 cents per thousand for the library district. That's how the funding occurs from what's on your property tax bill. And I think the impression was that we would need to go out for, an additional fund to increase that amount of money. And at that point in time, we could clarify some of these disparities, or, in terms of, how some of this is being interpreted as part of that process. But as Greg pointed out, that, this it's definitely been delayed through the pandemic, and, and I think it's how it gets started back up. And I think it's going to be, it's not going to be as, it's going to be a slower process than we had originally anticipated.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. So any I know we've thrown a lot of information at folks, so hopefully it's somewhat comprehensible. Are there any concerns or questions about the financial portion of the report?
Greg, I mean, I think we should talk a little bit about our fund balance.
Fund balance, okay.
I mean, we have two fund balances in a sense. We have the I guess it's like restricted funds. It's for that facility
Yes.
fund, and then we have I'll call it the library fund balance that we have.
Correct.
And that also has come up at that was brought up at LDAC in our last meeting about the fact that we and some other libraries have a substantial, significant, I don't know what word to use, but we have a lot of dollars in that fund balance.
Yes.
And so how one thing is we can debate how we got there. The other thing is that from my perspective, it's being more and more transparent about that fund balance and that we have it. And I think we obviously have done quite a bit this last year in terms of Greg's work with the finance department to really look at what do we need as a reasonable fund balance to be assured that we're not going to get into difficulties from an operations standpoint. And then we still know that we have, there's probably at least a couple $1,000s in that, at least generally in that range.
A little more, yes. So yeah.
So go ahead, you want to talk about it some, and then I'll add if anything is relevant.
Yeah, and just so our fund balance as of the end of this, this fiscal year that's being reported here, we had about $3.5 million in our library fund. And like Nick said, we've worked with the finance department to come up with a target reserve for that fund balance. The way our library district taxes work is we don't get our tax distribution until December or January. So we have to make sure we have enough cash on hand in the library fund to be able to get through those first 7 months of the year to pay our bills. And so working with the finance department, we kind of looked at what those needs were, and we came up with a formula, which is basically 7 months worth of operating expenses, 1 year's worth of debt service payments, just to make sure that we can always pay the bond off, and then a 10% contingency. And so when you look at this fiscal year 1920 and apply that formula, that's about $2 million that we should have reserved in our library fund every year, just to make sure that we can fund the library without any interruption in case something terrible happens. So our fund balance at the end of this year was higher than that. It was $3.5 million, and Nick is correct. That's kind of the discussion that's probably going to come up at the next LDAC meeting. Is you've got this additional money sitting in your library fund. What are your plans for it? And my answer at this point would be, this is a discussion that we're going to have as a library board. This is a discussion that's going to lead into budget talks. And, we have different options for what we could potentially do with that fund balance. There are some people who think we shouldn't use it for anything capital related. One idea that I've always had is we could use it to pay off some of our debt. And then that would increase the amount of money that's coming in from the library district that we could then use for operations. But yeah, this is all a conversation to have. So I think for the moment, the answer that we would have for LDAC, and if anybody has questions or concerns about it, that's what we'd like to hear. The answer would be, yes, we've got a fund balance that's about $3.5 million. Of that, $2 million is earmarked just for our cash needs, just to make sure that we have enough in the bank to pay for our ongoing operations. And for the rest of it, that's going to be a topic of conversation with our library board, with our community, and that's going to inform our budget, next time around.
Just to be totally transparent, we also have the 700,000 plus.
Yes.
The facilities.
Yes.
Contingency fund.
Yep. And that was the next one. So yes, so that's another fund, and that's typically where we put. So every year we try to put some money aside for our future capital needs. At a future library board meeting, I have a study now from a consultant which shows what our capital needs are going to be for the next 20 years. So I'll spring that on folks in a couple of months. We'll get to figure out, how we want to address that. But we try to put money aside every year so that we can pay for some of those capital needs, and that goes into what's called our community facilities fund. And so there's about, as of the end of 1920, there was about 700,000 in there. And we do also use that, as part of our budget. When we know we're going to have improvements, capital improvements to make in the building, we pay for it out of that community facilities fund. So yeah, that's what that fund is for.
I want to be respectful of time. It's already 6:30, so I want to be sure that we were giving you what you need in this item. Any other questions about that? I mean, the fund balance discussion is going to be something that's going to be ongoing for sure, particularly before the next budgeting period. It's a topic that Greg and I have talked about at length, and I think we need to see what the options are for that money. And I think it really relates also to the service standards in the next section of the report. And what is the pleasure of the board to continue with this? I'd sort of like to complete this if we can, but can you power through it, Greg?
I can power through it, yes. Is everybody okay with 10 more minutes? Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Section 3, service standards, those are just directly from that attachment C, which I showed everybody. So that takes a look at, for our library, if you run our population through those calculations, here's what we should be providing in terms of open hours, collection size, and FTE. And it just, it gives the numbers there. You can see the one where we don't meet the threshold that's identified in the IGA, which I should stress, it's an aspirational threshold, is in FTE. So, going through the calculation for the standards that were in force at the time, we should have about 20 FTE. We have 16, or for the end of this reporting period, we had 16. I will say that for our current budget, that's up to about 18. Right now, we were able to add a couple more. I will say, I was talking to somebody about this. When it comes to FTE, the discussion that I'm more interested in having, and that really impacts our ability to provide service, is not so much the number of FTE, because those are full-time equivalents. It's the distribution of those FTE between actual full-time people who work here and some of our on-calls are part-time. So for example, in our current budget, we have about 18 FTE allocated. Of those, 11 or 12 are actually full-time bodies, people who are here 40 hours a week. The rest, about 6 FTE worth, are on-calls that we plug in where we need to. That translates, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, that translates probably to about 25 bodies, 25 to 30 bodies.
Probably about 26 right now, yeah.
26 right now. So managing that many on-calls and plugging them in a lot of areas throughout the library, I would say from an operational perspective, that's our biggest challenge here at the library. I know I have some colleague libraries of similar size who their mixture of full-time versus on-calls is much more heavily weighted towards the full-time employees, and that gives them some stability in scheduling. It gives them stability in scheduling programs, doing outreach, things like that. We are reliant a lot more than some other libraries on that on-call help. And Denise and I have, spitballed this. Conservatively, Denise probably spends 15% of her time just dealing with the schedule with on-calls, and trying to plug holes and trying to make, keep the doors open, keep our desk staff, and make sure that we have sufficient staff in the building. So when it comes to FTE, that's my biggest concern, which we'd have as a budgetary, we can talk.
Correct. There's also an equity issue here. I mean, those are people that are not getting benefits.
Correct. Yes.
So I mean, in a way where we're utilizing part-time. I mean, I know this from community college days as well. I mean, that there's a game that's played with the budget because a fully benefited person is a lot more expensive. And but it means that we have 30 people that are not getting benefits and they're working. So that's the concern. And I think that we need to push as much as we can in the budgetary process and, for shifting that based on equity alone, let alone the burden on Denise. I'm sensitive to that, but
I would strongly agree with that.
I just think there's an equity issue here that we need to weigh in on.
I would not argue that in the least. So these will be great conversations to have for budget talks. So those are the service standards. There is one question here. You'll see, during the reporting period, did your library board review the most recent OLA public library standards? I looked back at our 12 months of meetings within this period. We did not discuss those. We discussed it about 2 months before. And then COVID hit, and I have not brought those standards back to the board. They haven't changed since last year. But I did have no, and the section where we ask, if you did review the standards, did you share any findings?
Did we review them in fiscal year 19/20?
2021, this fiscal year, we certainly could. We still have time to do them. So.
That would be for this year, but so we did not review them in fiscal year 20 or 19/20.
Correct. Yes, we reviewed them last formally at the very end of 18/19. It was like May, or I think it was May of 18/19. So
okay, all right, thank you.
So, yep.
Greg, do you need board action on this in order to authorize you to submit it?
Yes. So I would want the library board to say that they're comfortable with the information that's in this report, and that I'll get Nick's signature and electronic signature and your electronic signature, but the expectation is that the library board approves this before it is submitted to LDAC. Now, I don't have a deadline yet for LDAC, but the communication, the feeling from LDAC was they would like to have these 1920 reports sooner rather than later. So I'm trying to be responsive to that desire and get this submitted.
So could I have a motion if people are so moved?
Oh, and before you do, may one more. So section 4 is additional comments. You can put any additional comments. The library board may put any additional comments they want to in there. I just put that there were a couple of notable events, that during the reporting period, you had a new library director and a pandemic hit. So
other than that, Mr. Lincoln.
I would move that we submit this as reported at this meeting and shown in this document.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, so moved. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for putting up with.
You're welcome.
Long explanation.
So, just an update of the board before we adjourn. Cynthia and I and Greg and Denise met to start reviewing the strategic plan and to start doing the pre-review, because we're going to, of course, come back to the board with the suggestions that we have. We had a very good first session. We got another one scheduled in December. And so by sort of the beginning of the year, it would be my guess, we'll have some suggested changes to the existing plan and then some discussion, because we're going to be endeavoring to start another one in another year or so. So, okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll adjourn the meeting at 6:39. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
great Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yes, to everyone, be well, be safe, and be full.
Yeah.
Bye.
Definitely do that.